Hello, Ceramics One. We would like everyone to get on the same page as far as how we recycle our clay. It's important for you to know the entire process from when clay is bone dry and how we get it rehydrated and back in your hands to do some wheel throwing. We also need your help. Every single member in the ceramics room is going to be helping pugging, helping recycle, and so you need to know the correct steps to do it well. As of anything in the ceramics room, it is a constant battle between too dry clay, too wet clay for whatever purpose you need it to be. So we're going to take both bone dry clay and leather hard clay and mix in some slip and rehydrate it so that it is good clay to wheel throw at, so kind of a softer wet clay. So first, let me show you kind of where this all happens. This is in the corner of our ceramics room. Right here we have bone dry clay. This is clay that is absolutely dry with no water in it. In the blue bin here, we have leather hard and any kind of working clay that is too dry for us to use just for a new project, but just needs a little more moisture in it to rehydrate. This middle pugger and back white clay only, this is for ceramics 2, so you don't need to do anything with this kind of middle area. And then the pugger to the far right here, this is Peter the pugger, and he we use all the time. It's kind of like a baby cement mixer, so there is a motor inside that turns a wheel, and if I turn it to go this direction, it turns the clay, and then if I spin the wheel the opposite direction, it pugs the clay right out. Once it gets pugged out of this nozzle, it gets cut and put in this black bin for wheel throwers to use later. Just make sure that you keep the lid on it to keep all of the moisture inside. So let me just kind of show you the process that I would use. If you were the pugger that day and you came to the pugger, the first thing you need to do is just check and see how the clay is inside the pugger. The first thing you might notice to get it unlocked is there's a locking mechanism that you squeeze to lock. This doesn't always need to be locked. It sometimes can stay down, but if it is locked, you just need to push this little thing down and it unlocks, and then you pull it up to see about the clay inside. When I first come over to start pugging, I will want to know how full it is and also the consistency that's in here. It needs to be wet clay that's doesn't have any chunks of any dried clay in it, and it's smooth and nice to work with. That's how we know that it's ready to be pugged out. When we pug out, we close this lid. The motor can't run unless it's closed. You might have to push this side in a little bit to get it to close, and we just clamp it down like that. When you're ready to start the pugger, you'll come to this main access area here. This is obviously the stop button to get it to all stop. We have start, and then we have a switch that has pug and mix. Mix means that it's turning this way to mix the clay together. Pug means that it's turning this way to pug it out. So to pug it out, it's ready to go. So I have it on pug. I don't need to worry about the bottom two here. I'm trying not to touch all these buttons with my very clayey hands because that'll gunk up the buttons here. And then I just press start. When I press start, you'll barely hear it running because it's so quiet. And I need to be ready for clay to come out of here. So I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to check and see if this is crusty right here, because you might want to cut off the dried bits and put it back in the pugger. I'm going to take this tool here to cut it off as it comes out, and I'm just going to make sure it's on pug, and then I press start. It might take just a little bit for it to push this way, and you'll see that it's coming out now. I like to cut it at around 6-inch segments, kind of like that. And then we just put them right in the bin and stack them up. And that is all there is to pugging the clay out. We do this until there is no more clay coming out of the bin. clay in. Now it's slowing down, and so it looks like that's about all the clay that there is left. Oops, surprised me with a little bit more. So when it kind of slows down, we know that it's kind of running out of clay to push out. And so I just hit the big red button to stop it. I cut off that little piece, and then I make sure to put the lid back on, both the pugger and the bin. That way that the wheel throwers will be able to use this clay later. So now the pugger is empty. And so if I was to come over to the pugger and it's my turn to be a pugger and it's empty, it means that I need to load it with clay that is either a little too dry or a little too wet. And really the kicker is getting a little bit of both in. So you get a little bit too dry clay, then you get a little bit wet clay, and you try to really balance it out. We don't put bone dry clay into the pugger because it's too dry. It would have to sit in there and re-moisturize for a long time before you could actually pug it out. Otherwise, you get bits of bone dry clay in your clay that you're trying to throw with, and it's really annoying. So what we actually do is we take the bone dry clay and we put it in our slip bucket. So just yesterday, I took a lot of the bone dry clay and I actually put it directly into the slip bucket. So you'll notice the slip bucket is really full right now. That means there's a lot of clay in here. So it's separated, so there's water on top. So we could actually take some of that water out with a bucket, because that's clean enough to actually go down the drain. And then you can dig in and there is some clay that used to be bone dry, and now it's going to be the wetter part of the clay that goes into the pugger. The other clay that we put in the pugger is from the blue bin. And the blue bin over here is a mix of kind of all the stuff that people kind of thought this dried out too much. This was a little bit dry. So we mix all the dry clay and the slip clay. So here I'm just filling the pugger. You can see that I'm getting the leather hard clay from the blue bucket and just slamming it down in. There are certain moments in this where you will see me close the pugger and start it. See how I'm closing it, starting it, and then immediately opening it. And what that does is it mixes the clay down into the pugger so I have more room to fill it, because Peter likes to be really, really full of clay before you pug. This takes a little bit of time to just fill him all the way up. And then I'm ready to kind of check consistency and see if I have a good balance of wet and dry clay. This looks really full to me. It looks pretty wet, maybe a little too wet. And so I'm going to let it run for about 5 minutes to see if we can get it to a nice consistency. Sometimes locking this is a little bit hard. And so what I do is I kind of just lean all my weight on it and then try to close that by pinching. And then I just make sure it's on mix and I hit start. And now it's going to mix for about 5 minutes and we'll see what consistency it is then and if it's ready to pug out. So as I was pugging, I noticed that my muddy hands were really getting the buttons really muddy, and that's not good for our pugger and it's not good for like the electronics. So I went ahead and covered it with a plastic bag. So if you do see this plastic bag here, please don't take it off. It is to protect the buttons, and you can just press the buttons right through the plastic bag. So what I'm going to do is this has been pugging for a couple of minutes, and I'm wondering if it's a good consistency to pug out. So I can either just open this, which is going to stop the motor from running as a safety mechanism, but you don't have to push the button, or you can just hit the stop button. I'm going to unlock it. I'm going to pull it up, and I'm just going to feel it for good consistency. Is it a little too sticky? Would you want to throw with it? It is not bad to have it a little bit sticky, especially towards the end of the day, because it'll dry out a tiny bit in the bin before tomorrow and people will be able to wheel throw with it. So actually, I think this is pretty good. Just making sure that there's no chunks that are not mixed in it, that it's really an even consistency overall is a big one. So once I'm ready to pug, I'm going to close it up. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to switch this little switch from mix to pug, and then I'm going to hit the green start button, and that will cause the wheel to spin the other way. And it's going to start spitting out, so I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to go ahead and cut chunks about 6 inches. Slowing down now, so I know that it is almost done. I'm just going to stop it by hitting the red button, cut that off, put the lid back on, put the clay bin lid back on, make sure it doesn't dry out. Boop. And then I can just leave the pugger off for the next group, or I could open it back up and I could fill it back up again. This is something that kind of you get the hang of once you have worked with clay and you kind of know what consistency you want. In general, if you don't know what you're doing, just aim for a little bit of dry and a little bit of wet, and it often evens itself out. If you have questions as you're going along, flag down a teacher, say, hey, is this too wet? Is this too dry? Is this ready to pug? We'll help you out. And there is certainly a lot of kids who have already pugged in here. So that is Peter the Pugger. That is how we recycle clay. And this is by no means the only way to recycle. You don't actually need a pugger. You could just put all of your clay into water, make sure it's like a nice soupy consistency, and then slowly dry it out. I could just take that clay right out of the slip bucket, kind of wedge it into balls, and then let it to dry to a consistency that I like it. And that could be the end of my recycling. But luckily we have Peter to make our work a little bit faster and to recycle as much clay as we do in this room. That is recycling clay.